A quorum being present, the committee will come to order. Today we are meeting to consider three measures. H.R. 1413 to direct the Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security to address vulnerabilities in aviation security by carrying out a pilot program to screen airport workers with access to secure and sterile areas in airports. Second is H.R. 1717 to amend the Homeland Security Act of 2002 to establish a national bio and agro-defense facility, and H.R. 1955 to amend the Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act of 2007. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to make an opening statement. We're here to consider three bipartisan bills that were authored by members of this committee. Each addresses a different Homeland Security challenge: aviation security, agri-terrorism, and radicalization. Common to all three bills is a commitment to study and develop solutions for how to make America more secure. The first bill, H.R. 1413, was introduced by Representatives Lowy and Brown-Waite to establish a pilot program to test the viability of physically screening airport workers at 7 airports. Consideration of H.R. 1413 is timely in light of recent news report about workers being able to enter secure areas of the Phoenix airport after hours with little or no security. Most airport workers are trustworthy individuals who are not a threat to the traveling public. However, in a post-9/11 world, we have to address the risk of an inside job where an attack is perpetrated or aided by an airport worker that exploit gaps in security. H.R. 1413 does just that. It does so in a way that takes into account the operational challenges of small airports and give airports flexibility as to how they utilize their screening lanes. Additionally, the Transportation Subcommittee accepted language offered by Mr. Lundgren to direct the evaluation of alternative forms of screening, including biometrics, behavior recognition, canine teams, and targeted physical screening. Under the leadership of Subcommittee Chairwoman Jackson Lee, H.R. 1413 was agreed to as amended on April 24 by voice vote. The second bill to be considered is H.R. 1717, a measure to establish a national bio and agro-defense facility, the NBAF, within DHS to research foreign animal diseases and biological threats. The bill was introduced by Mr. McCall and was approved by the Emergency Threats Subcommittee on June 6th. Diseases and other biological threats, both man-made and naturally occurring, present a real danger to the health and economic security of the United States. A critical piece of our nation's defense against such threat is research. For over 50 years, the Plum Island Animal Disease Center has served as this nation's key research facility for foreign animal diseases. Both DHS and its partners in this research, the Department of Agriculture, agree that an upgraded facility is necessary. This is the reason that NBAF and this legislation to authorize it are so important. My amendment, in the nature of a substitute, which I will present in a few moments, improves on the underlying legislation in important ways. First, it makes clear that Congress expects DHS and USDA to work in partnership. It requires the two secretaries to develop a joint strategy for research at the new facility. It also requires the two secretaries to formalize their respective responsibilities in an interagency agreement. All activities at the NBAF will flow from the agreement, including the governance structure. Through a permit granted by the Secretary of Agriculture, the NBAF will conduct research on live virus of foot and mouth disease, which is currently not allowed on the U.S. mainland. This research is critical as foot and mouth disease presents the largest economic threat to the U.S. livestock industry. Earlier this month, DHS announced that the initial site selection process was completed and that 5 sites have been selected as finalists. Those sites are required to complete an environmental impact statement before the final selection, and DHS needs the authority granted in this bill to ensure final completion of the process. Over the past several months, the committee has worked closely with the Committee on Agriculture, DHS, USDA, and several professional organizations to develop the amendment in the nature of a substitute that will be considered today. The amendment ensures that the interests of both DHS and USDA are protected and the security of the U.S. agricultural industry is enhanced. The last bill we will be considering today was introduced by Representative Harmon and Reichert. H.R. 1955, the Homegrown Terrorism Prevention Act, acknowledges that the threat of violent radicalization in the United States is real, and the sooner we understand the nature of the threat, the sooner we can act to prevent it. The bill creates a national commission to bring the best minds together to study the problem and develop concrete legislative strategies for eradicating violent radicalization in America. The bill also establishes a Center of Excellence for the Prevention of Radicalization and Homegrown Terrorism to study the social, criminal, political, psychological, and economic roots of the problem. It also directs our Homeland Security officials to examine the experiences of other nations with homegrown terrorism so that we can learn from them. H.R. 1955, which was approved in the Intelligence Subcommittee on July 17th by voice vote, also takes measurable steps to protect civil rights by making sure that particular races, religions, or national origins are not targeted as a result of this legislation. Passage of this bipartisan bill, like the other 2 under consideration today, will help to make our nations more secure. Our ranking member is not here at this time. When he comes, we will allow his opening statement to be made. I now recognize each relevant subcommittee chair and ranking member for a brief opening statement. I first recognize the chairwoman of Subcommittee on Transportation, Security, and Infrastructure Protection, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you for your support of this legislation. Let me thank the gentlelady from New York for her persistent leadership and her guest appearance and participation in the Subcommittee on Transportation Security. It was instructive and very important. This is an important markup today, and it's important in light of the landscape in which we find ourselves. One, we are to congratulate the members of this committee for the conference report on H.R. 1, but we're also very well aware of the major pronouncements through the National Intelligence Estimate, many of them publicized, about the conditions that we find ourselves in August of 2007. I don't think that we can be any less mindful of the importance of being secure. To add to the importance of this legislation is the backdrop of the airport in Arizona, which through video showed many of us that there are stark reasons why we must ensure the 100% screening of those who work in the airport. This legislation, as amended, is to direct the Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, Homeland Security, Transportation Security Administration to address vulnerabilities in aviation security by carrying out a pilot program to screen airport workers with access to secure and sterile areas of airports. Mr. Chairman, the timing of this markup is very critical in light of the recent exposure of great vulnerabilities in our airport screening at the Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix. This is an important bill, and the amendment that I have offered to it in the form of a manager's amendment only amplifies the message. After the Phoenix incident, I communicated with the head of the Transportation Security Administration to raise the question, how many other airports are in such a predicament? The answer has not finally arrived. There's been a cursory review, and through the cursory review, there is an indication that maybe all might be well, but we have not thoroughly investigated the issues dealing with screening of employees. This bill, H.R. 1413, establishes a pilot program that will test the viability of screening airport employees when they access secure areas during the course of their work. H.R. 1413 is an important and timely bill because of the recent security breaches at our nation's airports. There are many people who work in our nation's airport, both for TSA and private companies, who have access to highly secured areas. We call that areas that are sterile. This legislation seeks to ensure that those persons who have access to secure areas are trustworthy individuals who are not a threat to the traveling public. This is not a condemnation of hardworking Americans, but it is a recognition that we must be secure. There are many recent incidences of employees using their access to these areas to commit crimes. At O'Hare Airport in Chicago, an undercover sting revealed that an airport worker was being paid to help undercover agents bypass security to smuggle nearly $400,000 overseas. At Orlando International Airport, an undercover reporter found TSA workers accessing a sterile area with bags that weren't screened. Just last month, it was revealed that workers at Orlando International exploited a gap in security that allowed them to get a bag full of guns and drugs on a plane bound for Puerto Rico. 29 individuals were charged in Miami, and by the way, the day we were having the hearing, the representative from Miami was testifying while this was happening at her airport. We've already mentioned the Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix. We have considered a lot of technical and substantive issues. We work with the Transportation Security Administration so that specifically that we have language that designates that one of the 7 airports be a Category 3 airport, replacing airport worker with individuals with unescorted access, allowing designated screening lane to be used for passenger screening, and adding an operational assessment. We also reduced the number of airports eligible to use a private contractor to conduct screening for individuals covered under this act from 2 to 1. However, this airport must currently use private contractors to be eligible. We also designate that one of the 7 airports deploy alternative means of screening all individuals with unescorted access to secure and sterile areas to have a contrast. I feel these additions make this a robust pilot program, and I am grateful for the leadership of my ranking member, and I would sincerely hope that as we move forward, that amendments will make it stronger and not weaken it, because this is no time to fall back on securing America. This is no time on falling back on securing the nation's airports. I ask my colleagues to support H.R. 1413, and I thank again the gentlelady from New York. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Our ranking member, Mr. Lundgren, is not here. Our chairman of the Subcommittee on Emergency Threats, Cybersecurity, and Science is also not present. But our ranking member, Mr. McCall, is here, and we will recognize him for 2 minutes. Mr. McCall.
Security apparatus. There's no disagreement among the Agriculture and Homeland Security committees and communities that MVAC is a crucial component of our nation's strategy to defend against agro-terrorism and emerging animal and zoonotic disease threats. No one questions that traditional foreign animal disease research is important to our nation's health, economy, and security. And as such, USDA will be free to conduct its own research at MVAC without interference from DHS, as well as at several of their own USDA laboratories. The reason for creating the MVAC, however, is to focus on high-consequence foreign animal and zoonotic diseases. In other words, diseases that could seriously impact our homeland security. We need to get this facility built in the interest of national security, and we need to do it as quickly as possible. In order to begin the construction process, which will cost about $450 million, DHS must have the authorities it needs to develop, construct, and operate the MBAF. This legislation does just that. It provides DHS the authorities it needs to ensure that the MBAF is built and is operational as soon as possible. Unfortunately, jurisdictional battles here on the Hill prevented this bill from being marked up earlier. However, today I'm pleased that we in the Congress and on this committee worked through our jurisdictional issues and are finally able to give the department what it needs to protect this country. This bill now enjoys wide bipartisan support from members of Congress as well as industry groups, including the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from Texas for his opening statement. I now recognize the chair of the Subcommittee on Intelligence, Information Sharing, and Terrorism Risk Assessment, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Harmon, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On last night's national news was a story about ex-soldier and fugitive Christopher Riendeau and his capture by a bounty hunter. The story is that Riendeau had agreed to sell this bounty hunter a motorcycle stored in a Georgia shed. But it turned out that the shed contained more than just a motorcycle. The bounty hunter found 16 loaded and fully functional pipe bombs, C4 explosive, grenade fuses, and an arsenal of firearms and ammunition. A crisply pressed military uniform and Nazi paraphernalia were also recovered. In terms of the terrorist threat, a lone wolf like Riendeau and al-Qaeda-inspired cells, which we all know about, may well be America's future. That's why it is so crucial to understand who and how people like Riendeau could become radicalized to the point of planning to inflict mass casualties on their neighbors and communities. The bill that our subcommittee has reported is a thoughtful effort to apply a multidisciplinary approach to uncovering and understanding the root causes of homegrown terrorism. Homegrown terrorism is a growing worldwide threat, and it's not going away. Riendeau is not the only example. There's Russell DeFreitas, indicted last month for conspiring to destroy JFK Airport and killed thousands by blowing up fuel storage facilities. There's Mohammed Schnur, who allegedly plotted with others to attack New Jersey's Fort Dix and kill as many soldiers, American soldiers, as possible. And Kevin James, an American incarcerated in California, who adopted a radical interpretation of Islam and converted fellow prisoners to his cause. He and the others await trial for committing robberies in order to finance alleged terror attacks against military facilities, synagogues, and other targets in the Los Angeles area. I am very proud that this bill, introduced last April by our ranking member, Sheriff Reichert, and me, was improved by an amendment in the nature of a substitute and reported out of our subcommittee unanimously. Let me repeat, seldom heard words. We had unanimous bipartisan support in our subcommittee for this bill. It will accomplish 4 goals. First, it establishes a National Commission on the Prevention of Radicalization and Ideologically Based Violence. And note, we chose those words very carefully after talking to numerous outside experts. The commission will conduct an expedited but thorough study of what's happening so we can find an American response to our indigenous threat. Second, it establishes a center of excellence for the study of violent radicalization and homegrown terrorism in the United States, which will address the problem over the long term. Third, it requires the Department of Homeland Security and other federal agencies to work with our allies to learn about their experiences with homegrown terror. And finally, it requires the department to protect the constitutional and civil rights of all Americans as it conducts its work. We're hopeful that a companion bill will be introduced shortly in the Senate. I urge passage of our subcommittee product in today's markup and yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now recognize our ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Reichert, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your support of H.R. 1955. And the chairman and I have developed a great working relationship, and indeed this has been a bipartisan effort that we are both proud of, and that the entire subcommittee is very proud to present today for the full committee's consideration. H.R. 1955, as amended at the subcommittee, is primarily focused on establishing a national commission on the prevention of violent radicalization and ideologically based violence, homegrown terrorism. The purpose of the National Commission would be to proactively get ahead of the radicalization problem before it becomes widespread in the United States. Recent terror plots discovered in Los Angeles, JFK Airport in New York, and Fort Dix in New Jersey were planned by radicalized individuals living inside the United States. Unfortunately, the National Intelligence Estimate released just 2 weeks ago indicates that this is a growing problem. The unclassified key findings state, quote, "The radical and violent segment of the West Muslims population is expanding, including in the United States, and there is the possibility that others may become sufficiently radicalized that they will view the use of violence here as legitimate," end quote. It is important that we develop a strategy to understand and combat violent radical beliefs before they take root in this country. The better we understand radicalization, the better we can prevent radical ideologies from spreading inside America. The bill that we are considering today is the result of our bipartisan efforts. I would again like to commend Chairwoman Harman for her work with me on this bill and the entire subcommittee. And again, it's been a pleasure to travel around and do some field hearings. And really, we have had the best witnesses and great testimony that have helped build this bill, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for considering it today, and I yield.
Thank you very much. Other members may submit opening statements for the record. Pursuant to an agreement with the ranking member, we will be following our standard committee practices and use a roster. We have 2 pre-filed amendments for consideration on the roster. Amendments that are not pre-filed may be considered after there has been an opportunity for the amendments on the roster to be offered to the extent practicable and not prohibited by House or committee rules. I now call up the committee print of H.R. 1413, the first committee print to be considered. Without objection, the first reading of the committee print is dispensed with. Without objection, the committee print is open for an amendment at any point. The clerk will designate Section 1.
Section 1, Enhanced Perimeter Security and Access Control through Comprehensive Screening of Airport Workers.
We will now proceed with consideration of the bill. Before we proceed with that, we want to recognize actually the author of the bill, Ms. Lloyd.
And I thank the chairman, and I want to thank you and Ranking Member King for bringing this bill before the committee. I want to thank the subcommittee chair, Sheila Jackson Lee, for her work and her leadership. I also want to thank my colleague from Florida, Ms. Brown-Waite, who I guess is on her way, for working with me on this legislation. Mr. Chairman, this legislation would require TSA to create a pilot program at 7 airports to screen all workers with unescorted access. And this is an important term, and one I feel this committee will surely hear again in the future in light of the most recent security breach at Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix. While TSA has subsequently begun screening workers around the clock in Phoenix, we cannot wait for the next security breach to occur for us to take action. In 2001, Congress recognized that while we were investing significant resources in screening passengers and their baggage, we needed to close the back door of airports as well. That's why we passed the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, which required the Transportation Security Agency to screen all airport workers. Yet nearly 6 years after September 11th and passage of legislation requiring the physical screening of all airport workers, astonishingly, TSA has failed to implement this basic policy or set a deadline for doing so. At Heathrow Airport, the busiest international airport in the world, 100% of workers are screened. Yet TSA refuses to acknowledge the national security benefits of following the same procedures here at home. Just this year alone, there have been frightening security breaches at Orlando International Airport, the arrest of a former airport worker as part of a terrorist plot involving John F. Kennedy Airport in New York, and now a gaping lapse in security in Phoenix. We're also well aware of Secretary Chertoff's gut feeling about the heightened threat we face this summer. It simply defies logic that TSA and the aviation industry continue to resist full screening. Yet, should there be another terrorist incident in connection to aviation, these very same groups will undoubtedly come to Congress and seek a bailout. Meticulously screening passengers but giving workers open access is like installing an expensive home security system but leaving your back door wide open. This language takes the first step towards closing this security loophole. It's similar to what the committee agreed to in a bipartisan manner last year during the DHS authorization markup. And I'd like to also point out to the committee that the fiscal year 2008 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill includes $5 million for costs associated with implementing this pilot program. Again, I want to thank the chairman for his support, for your co-sponsorship of H.R. 1413, and I look forward to working with you on this critically important issue in the future, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lowy. Are there any amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, but I intend to withdraw the amendment if I could just speak on the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on his amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have an amendment at the desk, and I do intend to withdraw the amendment. I do appreciate the intent of the underlying bill. I think it is it has all the right elements, but I do have a concern. My amendment essentially allows the Assistant Secretary to suspend the pilot program at any individual airport if he or she determines that the operations of the pilot at that particular airport, one, poses a threat to security operations at that airport, or two, requires a reallocation of resources that does not justify the operation of the pilot at that particular airport. And the third issue generates a prohibitive cost that far exceeds the security benefits of the pilot. Imposing some physical barriers on airport employees can have significant consequences to normal operations at any airport. The pilot program envisioned by the bill could be utilized at airports of different sizes and which have substantially different traffic patterns or potential security threats. At smaller facilities, such as one I represent, the Lehigh Valley International Airport, or LVIA, which is in my district, the consequences of applying the standards that might be applicable to a larger airport complex on the LVIA facility, for example, or other similarly sized airports could be very problematic in some cases. Because of the nature of their jobs, many airport employees must move from the unsecured area of the airport to the secured area of the airport, to that area where they call it the SITA, the Security Identification Display Area. They have to move several times a day. And in some cases, these records from the LNAA, which is the airport authority in my district, show that some employees pass into the secured area, or the SITA, over 60 times per day. And nearly all airline employees pass through those areas at least 10 to 30 times per day. And in an airport like mine, people multitask. They're moving back and forth. It's a small airport, so they're constantly going from job to job. One person doesn't have one particular job, so there's a lot of movement of people to do different jobs. But this airport is very conscious of the need for security in and around its facility, and it certainly works very hard to maintain a safe environment. For example, this airport that I represent requires a higher background check standard that directs that its employees submit to a 20-year background review instead of the 10-year one mandated by TSA. And that investigation requires employees to account for the time that they've lived overseas. Further, it requires that all employees and tenants must submit to this check regardless of their duties or where they work. These are standards that are well above and beyond what is put forth in the TSA mandate. And so we have to continue to promote this kind of vigilance and to reward it, as has been demonstrated by this airport. That's why I've introduced this amendment, which I will withdraw, and it would allow the Secretary to exempt from the pilot program facilities where imposing the program will actually make the airport less secure or will generate inappropriate costs and disruptions. And I think that this amendment, the intent at least, is a further step towards making sure that all security at airports is in fact risk-based and targeted to threats and vulnerabilities that may exist at a particular facility. And I do appreciate what Ms. Lowy and Ms. Brown-Wade are trying to do here. I would just ask for some consideration that maybe we can work with you to help the pilot as it relates to some of these small to mid-sized airports where we do have this rather excessive amount of movement from secure to non-secure areas, if there might be ways we can work with them to avoid disruptions and perhaps even create security issues.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond. I thank you for your willingness to withdraw the amendment, and I'd just like to make a few points. The point of the pilot is to increase security by screening individuals with access to secure areas of our nation's airport. We perform 100% passenger screening. We perform 100% baggage screening. We've just passed the HR 1 conference report, which mandates 100% screening of cargo and passenger aircraft. So it's inconceivable to me that closing the final loophole, a program that requires screening of these individuals, could decrease security. The real threat is not addressing this vulnerability through the pilot program. And I think it's important to mention to my colleagues that the administrator already has the necessary authority to adjust security directives in response to a specific security threat. Therefore, with great respect for my colleague, I think this amendment is unnecessary. This bill was drafted with strong bipartisan support. The amendment clearly undermines these efforts. I'm very pleased that you're withdrawing it, and if you have specific concerns, I'm sure the chairman and I and the subcommittee chair and all those who have input into this would be delighted to talk with you. But I think it's very important, and I want to address one other point you made, that as we're doing this demonstration, it will be small airports, large airports, medium airports, so we'll be able to have a good evaluation. Secondly, even though you had said, and I commend your airport, that there's a 20-year background check, we're concerned, and as we look at what's happening around the world, that someone with a perfectly fine background, they may even be a doctor, who, what has happened in London, could suddenly commit a problem, could certainly present a problem for all of us that could lead to the loss of lives. So I think this demonstration takes your concern to heart by doing the demonstration, all size airports, and certainly we'd be happy to work with
Would
you.
the gentlelady just yield for this one moment?
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, the intent here is just to ask for consideration that as we move this process forward, that we do listen to some of the specific concerns of small airports that are a bit different than the larger airports in terms of how they're managed. And one thing I do want to say about this issue is that, you know, a fuel handler or a mechanic, for example, can do a lot of damage with a wrench in a secured area, or a fuel handler driving jet fuel in a secured area can do a lot of damage with a vehicle. And I appreciate this intent, and I think it's important as we consider this that we do look at doing what my airport does and extending these background checks even further. I think that would do a great deal to help this process. I just want to work with you. I appreciate your willingness to do so. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. I'd be happy to yield if I have any more time.
Yeah, let me, and I thank the gentleman for withdrawing it, but I do want to emphasize the gentlelady's point. The manager's amendment specifically wanted to address the question of small airports, and so your Category 3 airport will be included. I hope that you will monitor TSA as they are putting this program forward so that we can get the best evidence. And my last point that I think you've already joined in is Skylark Airport just gives an example of the fact that we don't really know whether there are any other airports that are not having 24/7 screening of those who are entering as workers. I think it's important for this pilot program to be in place to be able to address that question, but we will take into consideration those smaller airports, but they are important. It's important for them to be secure as well. I yield back to the gentlelady.
I think my time is over.
You have 1 minute.
I have 1 minute, then I'm delighted to yield to my colleague to my left, Ms. Norton.
I thank the lady for yielding. I say this is only a pilot, and the point of a pilot is normally to test precisely the kinds of issues that the gentleman raises, and to allow, when there is a full, which is what we really should have, some kind of full screening of this kind, to know how to differentiate in just the way you say. But without a pilot, then of course you can't make those distinctions. And if I may say so, my only concern about this is there's only 7 airports. We are so late in doing this, and this is not the first time it's been reported, that people go through airports unscreened. I think we if anything, this is a very conservative, perhaps too conservative amendment.
And reclaiming my time, I want to say to my colleague, Eleanor Holmes Norton, I agree with you. This was a compromise. I think doing 7 airports at a time when the head of Homeland Security said he has a gut feeling something could happen. We saw the pictures of what was happening in Phoenix, people with backpacks going through. Who knows what was in there? I would do 100% screening. But we are dealing now with this demonstration, and I hope we don't have any incidents along the way, and I yield back the balance.
Thank you very much. Yield 5 minutes to the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank Ms. Lowy for putting forward this this proposal and for having us adopt it today. Obviously, what we saw in the Phoenix information was pretty startling, even though many of us have known for a while that there are back people who don't get checked. You know, it's always interesting to me because, of course, Congress people, as you know, get checked when they go to the airplane. And here we are making the rules, and we're subject to the same rules as people. And one of the reasons that I have always said that I think we should is, who knows when one of us goes crazy and for some reason decide to go in and do something, in the same sense that even somebody who's had an extensive background check might be having a bad day at work. I mean, we see this in other places and at workplaces. So I think it's very important that we do check these people. And I would just like to say that in May I had the opportunity to go to Heathrow Airport and see the checking of every person who works in that airport. And very extensive, more extensive than anything that we do, not only for the passengers, but of course, for every person that works there at that airport. And, you know, with such a large airport, if they can do it in an efficient and effective way, then I think that we need to get to that standard here in the United States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Billirakis, did you want to make a statement?
Yes.
Yield 5 minutes to.
Yeah, I want to commend Congresswoman Lowy and Representative Brown Wade for this great bill. I think it's going to go a long way, and I also want to yield to my friend Representative Dent to please.
Thank you. And I'm not trying to prolong this. Thank you for yielding. My friend, I do totally support the intent of this legislation. I think the pilot's a good idea. It is a conservative approach. The only thing I'm asking for is consideration for the smaller airports as we move forward with the pilot, just so we understand the difference between an LVIA versus a Heathrow or a Dulles or Philadelphia. That's the whole intent. And so I just thank you for yielding and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. I assure the gentleman, all of us are not in the big airport markets, so we do recognize it, and I assure you that we will work to make sure that the pilots do reflect your concerns. The gentleman from Pennsylvania withdraws his amendment. Are there any other amendments to the bill? Hearing no further amendments, without objection, the title is amended. Hearing no further amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the committed print of H.R. 1413 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the bill as amended is agreed to. I now call up the question on agreeing to the bill as amended favorably, reporting to the House. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1413 as amended is ordered reported to the House with a favorable recommendation.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Souder.
pursuant to the House Rule 11, Clause 2, I ask that members have an additional 2 calendar days to file with the clerk of the committee supplemental, additional, or minority views.
Without objection. I now call up the committed print for H.R. 1717, reflecting the agreement on amendments made by the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats, Cybersecurity, and Science and Technology. Mr. Langevin, did you want to do an opening statement since you were not here? Okay, we'll yield 2 minutes for an opening statement for Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. I'd just like to briefly highlight the importance of H.R. 1717, the National Bio and Agro-Defense Facility, otherwise known as MBAF Authorization Act, introduced by my colleague and ranking member on the subcommittee, Mr. McCall. In June, the Subcommittee on Emerging Threats, Cybersecurity, and Science and Technology had the opportunity to mark up this important piece of legislation. It received strong support and was approved by voice vote. And I'm pleased that today, with your help, Chairman Thompson, and your leadership, the full committee will now move forward to mark up this vital measure. For over 50 years, the Plum Island Animal Disease Center has served this nation as a key research facility for foreign animal diseases. That facility is now over half a century old, and experts agree that an upgraded facility is absolutely necessary. Current law, which dates back to 1948, requires that live foot and mouth disease virus be studied on an island to protect against an outbreak on the U.S. mainland. Plum Island has been one of many animal disease research centers run by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it's fulfilled a unique function partly due to its location off the U.S. mainland. Authorizing the National Bio and Agro-Defense Facility will significantly enhance our ability to study a broad range of zoonotic diseases and will advance our capability to produce effective countermeasures. In addition, H.R. 1717 will allow the Department to acquire or receive by donation property or other services to defray the cost of the new facility. I believe that this new and secure facility will improve our knowledge of and ability to mitigate against zoonotic diseases while maintaining our commitment to safety. Again, I would like to commend my colleagues, Mr. McCall and of course you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Thompson, for their leadership on this issue. Without today's markup, with today's markup, we move this bill forward in order to establish MBAF in statute. I urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Langevin. I now call up the committee print, and without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is open for amendment. The clerk will designate Section 1.
Section 1, National Bio and Agro-Defense Facility.
The bill is open for amendment. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1717, offered by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi.
The clerk will read the amendment.
Strike all after the enacting clause and insert the following. Section 1.
Without objection, the first reading of the amendment is waived. I recognize myself for 5 minutes to explain my amendment. As I explained in the beginning of this meeting, my amendment reflects a bipartisan agreement with the Agriculture Committee and will greatly improve this bill. I urge all members to support it. Without objection, I will insert 2 letters of support in the record from the National Milk Producers Federation and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Does anyone seek recognition on the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr.
Only
Evans.
a point of clarification. I have 2 substitutes here, and I assume the one that's dated July 30th at 4:24 p.m. is the one we're considering.
Clerk.
The amendment nature substitute is designated as July 17th, 3:47 p.m. Yeah.
July 30th.
Just a minute.
The substitute is July 17th. The committee print itself is July 30th at 4:24 p.m.
So they're the same amendment. Is that what you're saying?
You have 2 versions in the packet. The one is the committee print. The amendment in nature substitute is H.R. 1717-sub, dated July 17th, 3:47 p.m.
Thank you. Are there any further discussions on the amendment? If there are no further discussions on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of a substitute, the question on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of substitute, those in favor say aye. Those opposed is nay. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Hearing no further amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the committee print of H.R. 1717 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the bill as amended is agreed to. The question occurs on agreeing to the bill as amended and favorably reporting it to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1717 as amended is ordered, reported to the House with a favorable recommendation.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Souder.
Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I ask that members have an additional 2 calendar days to file with the clerk of the committee supplemental, additional, and minority views.
Without objections. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes. The full committee will now consider the committee print H.R. 1955, reflecting the agreement on amendments made by the Subcommittee on Intelligence, Information Sharing, and Terrorism Risk Assessment. This is the third bill that was noticed to be considered at this meeting. I now call up the bill. Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. Without objection, the committee print is open to amendment at any point. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 1955, committee print, showing the amendment in the nature of a substitute, adopted by the Subcommittee on Intelligence, Information Sharing, and Terrorism Risk Assessment.
We will now proceed with consideration of the bill. Are there any amendments to the bill? The clerk will, well, if there are no further discussion, no. If there are no amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the committee print for H.R. 1955. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. The question occurs on agreeing to the bill favorably reporting to the House. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1955 is ordered reported to the House with a favorable recommendation.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Souder.
Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I ask that members have an additional 2 calendar days to file with the clerk of the committee supplemental, additional, or minority views.
Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table, and staff is authorized to make any technical and conforming changes.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Sanchez.
I move to authorize the chairman to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on bills just ordered, reported by this committee, or on a similar Senate bill.
Without objection, so ordered. Before we adjourn, I'd like to welcome the gentleman from Georgia who was here, Mr. Brown, to the committee. I look forward to working with him. There being no further business, without objection, committee stands adjourned. Yeah.